What do you wish someone had told you when you were just starting out as a beginner birder?
And how can you stay open to birding even when you're in what seems like an unlikely spot to enjoy your passion? Join us now for the Hike Hearth Birding Podcast.
Okay, so it's a bit of a whirlwind of a weekend for us. Dustin has a new baby sitting in the driveway, his
Yay.
pride and joy. Do you want to tell our audience about it?
We just got a new platform for birding adventures and brand new 2024 Ford Ranger. So we will be towing stuff someday.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Dustin and I met a million years ago, he had just gotten his first car out of college, right? And it was
A 1999 Ford Ranger with
Yes.
the flare side box. That's crucial.
Yes. So I always joke around that I started dating him for his truck and his dog. But here we are all these years later, and we got more dogs, different dogs.
I'm just glad you'll stay with me now that I have truck and dogs again.
So that's one thing. But the other thing going on is that we are getting ready to head out on a trip. So we're a little casual today. We've been running around all day long, but we could not leave on our trip without recording this week's podcast because we had some really good ideas for topics, right? And so if you've been following our show and our channel for a while, you already know that birding is a huge part of Dustin's life. And from looking at birds came wildlife photography, and from that came local conservation work, and from that came nest box programs. But it didn't start out that way, did it?
No, and that wasn't the intention at all, right? It started out just with curiosity about birds. And like most things that are lifelong passions, it kind of snuck up on you. It started by being brand new to birding and open-minded about learning about stuff and making mistakes along the way and starting to build skills that I have now. And more importantly, it became a cherished and rewarding, even a central part of my life. So my sister Carrie was the first person who characterized this as my journey in birding, and I had never thought about it that way. And in the moment when she said it, it hit me like, yes, I am on this journey. And I'm happy to say the journey continues, pretty much every day. She was 100% right. And it's really fun now that Hike Hearth lets us continue that journey in yet a new way, because this is a hobby or a passion that just keeps on giving. It's a long game, and I'm into it.
So when you think back to those early days or months or years when you were just first trying to figure out this whole birding thing, what's something you wish someone had just come out and told you?
The thing for me has been the opportunity for discovery and the enjoyment of that at my own pace and in the direction of my choosing, because it's always been a hobby, something I do to relax and for fun in the in-between times. I wish I'd known about at the beginning that there were so many different styles of birding. It's not just checklists and twitching, running after a locally appearing rarity. Those can be fun, and the rush of seeing a new bird just does not get old. But there's also birding as meditation or as a healing process. Sometimes that's called slow birding. There's journaling, photography, social media birding, big days, big sits, big years, Christmas counts, reading, digiscoping, blogging, urban birding, travel birding, and ecotourism. And of course, my favorite, conservation and nest box and habitat support. I'm sure there's a myriad other ways that work for birding for other people too, which I've yet to discover.
So were there any things that you assumed in the beginning of your birding journey that turned out to be totally wrong or just unhelpful? Like things that maybe made it harder than it needed to be at the time?
Sure. I mean, it snuck up on me. I didn't intentionally become a birder, so I think my preconceptions were probably rather limited. But as I got into it, I thought maybe that birding was for dorks only. And I even was self-conscious about it, like introducing myself to other people. They'd be like, "Hey, what do you do for fun?" And I would say like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of dorky, but I'm into birding." And smart, sensitive people were like, "Oh, that's not dorky at all. That's cool. Like, what is it about it that you like?" And I realized setting something up as dorky makes it so, but being confident in it and realizing also birding has had like a real resurgence the last 10 years. Like it maybe used to be dorky a little bit, but there's a lot of like hipster and young people getting into birding. It's not the same hobby that it used to be.
So that's interesting because I've never considered being a dork or a nerd to be a negative thing. I've always considered myself like maybe a little bit alternative nerdy, but nerdy nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I'd encourage anybody who's never seen it to seek out the Venn diagram of dorks, dweebs, nerds, and geeks, I think. Because those things are about intelligence and social skills. And there's a nice Venn diagram that some people who are intelligent and have social skills, I forget which one it is. I think it's a nerd, right? But that plays into the whole thing, and
Interesting.
in a different way than I had planned to. But also in birding, there's a giant overlap with like conservation and local government. The community of birders are the people out there in the world that like truly are getting the righteous things done in the world, and it's been interesting to find that out.
Okay. All right. So what are some of the misconceptions that you think exist when it comes to when you're just starting out as a birder? Or maybe even if you've been birding for a while, this may be a misconception that some people still have.
Yeah, I think people feel undue pressure to like know birds the first time they see them, or know certain bird calls, or be able to ID a bird the first time you see them. And that's not it at all, right? Like a lot of birding, especially for new birders, is about seeing something, absorbing, processing its features, and narrowing down to what it could be. And if you narrow it down and you don't know what it is, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Birding with other people can help solve that gap. Taking a picture and bringing it home was the way I like to solve that gap, because I would then compare it to my guides and stuff like that. But you definitely don't need to know anything going into birding the first time. And then new birders, I think, sometimes can get overwhelmed with people's gear and the minutia around their gear, like the optics, and stuff like f-stops and shutter speeds and digiscoping and what all that means. I felt that this week I pulled up to meet a new quasi-interested birder who was helping with some conservation stuff, and I pulled up in a brand new truck and had fancy binoculars, and I felt self-conscious about that. But I'm way down the journey on that, and that's what works for me. But it doesn't need to be that way for everybody.
Yeah. And you saved up for those things and took your time, right?
Yeah, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit. But also like thinking that believing real birders can only bird or go explore in remote places. For me, it's been immensely rewarding to develop a local connection to the land, my local patch, so to speak, over time, learning its patterns and being able to see when it's healthy, when it's hurting. So this is the long game that I was speaking of earlier. And then lastly, for new birders, not knowing how helpful context really is. So whether that's habitat, location, the season, the behavior, and even human impact like development, those things all matter a lot. And getting more in tune with those does help you to be a better birder in a way that I just, didn't anticipate in the beginning.
Okay, so based on all of that, how has your mindset changed since then? Like, what do you do differently now that you didn't do back then?
Yeah, so this is really personalized to me. I rarely rush out to catch a rare bird. I ebb and flow that way and sort of keeping track of what's around. And I might go after a rarity once in a while, but that's not my like go-to birding game. I will go after some of them sometimes, but few rarities are truly as rare as they seem in that moment. So sometimes they might show up again in 2 or 3 years, and that still is fun to be had in the future. And I don't mind that. There will certainly be other times in my life God willing, that I have more time for birding and I'm less busy than I am now. And I don't mind saving good birds or good experiences for later. I want to savor those when I can, not just check the box and move on and put them behind me.
Mm.
So again, that's very personalized to me. But also like slowing down and focusing on observation instead of an ID. There's a lot of focus on like getting a live bird and seeing that bird for the first time, and that's well worth celebrating, right? Some people do a little lifer dance and they commemorate that moment with the people they're with, or even if they're alone, they do their lifer dance. But a birder that I followed early on named Bill Thompson III also introduced me to this concept called life looks. It might be a bird I've seen 100 times before, but if I get a better detailed look at it through my binoculars than I've ever had, that is also just as rewarding. So take like a pileated woodpecker. I see those kind of all the time, but at a distance, maybe as a flyover. Every once in a while, you'll get one 50 feet and it fills your binocular frame. And maybe you see the babies at the nest. Like those moments are super valuable to a lot of birders, myself included. I like to let the patterns and the familiarity of stuff do the heavy lifting for me. So I get in tune with the migration patterns and the biological life cycle patterns and let them lead the way a little bit in a way that I didn't when I was a new birder. And then using tools like Merlin or eBird or other guides, especially digital guides rather than flipping through pages. But I really stay away from them in the field. Being out in the field and experiencing the bird live is irreplaceable otherwise. So I fully absorb the experience and then go to my app if I need to confirm something or whatever. And then enjoy the process, not just the checklist. I am very much looking forward to an event in a couple of weeks called the Big Sit. That's going to be on June 1st, sponsored by Sudbury Valley Trustees, which is a nice regional conservation group here in Massachusetts. So stay tuned to hear about that in a few weeks and what we saw on the Big Sit.
Mysterious. I don't even know about this yet. Okay, so you've had people I know ask you for advice, casual birders or people that are trying to get into it. What do you think tends to trip people up the most that you've noticed in those conversations?
I think people feel a little bit of pressure to think of birding like a test and you have to get the ID right. So no one needs to feel like a birding expert to get started, right? It can be overwhelming to newcomers, whether it's like learning all these different species or these descriptive words, or really birders, like any hobby, have our own vocabulary. So that vocabulary can seem mysterious or overwhelming maybe a little bit. But they don't need to know that stuff. They're absorbing like the etiquette of birding and how to bird in a group particularly, and the etiquette of how to behave around birds, right? They sort of inherently know that they don't want to disturb the bird unnecessarily, even if they're not familiar with that yet. But then also all the sounds and the equipment that they see other people using, a lot of that can feel overwhelming. It doesn't. That stuff will become important to you over time at your own speed.
And a lot of that expensive stuff isn't really necessary to be a birder, right?
No, it's definitely not. And we're going to come to that as well. But it's important not to expect like instant results right away. And then the other thing is to like, new birders should never compare themselves to lifelong birders or people with like a $3,000 camera or other expensive optics, stuff like that. Realizing that the context matters as much. And then lastly, for new birders, don't be afraid of getting up early. That's definitely when the best stuff happens. If you're not an early riser, maybe your definition of early is a little bit different. But if 8 a.m. is early to you, make it a priority to get out as soon as possible during the day, because that's when the good stuff happens.
Okay. Did you ever get something like wildly wrong early on?
Beginner or not, every birder gets stuff wrong once in a while. And not once in a while, like a couple times, like all the time we get stuff wrong in the moment, because birding is tricky. Lots of species look alike, that sort of stuff. But I get where you're going with that question. Early on, I had kind of a humbling experience on an online birding forum of having mis-ID'd a Western tanager with an American goldfinch. The Western tanager happened to be showing up on someone's like brick windowsill in New York City, and American goldfinch was by far the more common species, and the angle and the color pattern looked like a goldfinch. But I learned that the beak was clearly Western tanager, and you couldn't possibly think it was a goldfinch with that beak. So I learned in that moment that beak is a much, much better filter for ID than color is. There's lots of yellow birds across multiple families, but once you know the beak like proportions and size a little bit, and it sounds daunting to new birders, but once you know those, you immediately get to the family that you're trying to ID. So it's really helpful to know like a warbler beak versus a tanager versus a sparrow or a finch with a really a really triangular beak. So that really helps you narrow it down a lot. So that was, a little bit of a difficult lesson with a really important outcome that I've been using ever since.
Okay. I guess my final question for this segment is going to be, what would you say to someone who thinks birding isn't for them because, like, they're not into hiking, or they live in an urban area, or they don't have a lot of gear, or they don't know a lot of birders to like teach them the ropes? Like, what would you say to that?
I'm going to hit you with an unexpected question. Are you ready?
Sure.
Name for me a place where no birds are around.
The moon.
Okay, well, no one's going. Most of us are not birding on the moon, so good.
You did not say on planet Earth.
That's great. That's great. But inherent in your answer is that birds are kind of everywhere inside of our atmosphere.
Well, I assume they are. Like, I don't know if they're in the Sahara Desert. But...
That's exactly right. Birds are everywhere. Therefore, birding works everywhere.
Got it.
And what I've learned, too, is that, like, you certainly don't need to be well-sighted to be a good birder. We've talked about this before. Mm-hmm. But eyesight is a very individualized attribute, right? If you have young, healthy eyesight, you might not need binoculars. So you don't need any gear to be a good birder. But if you're into it, for most sighted people, there's a reward to seeing a good bird. And binoculars are really the only essential piece of gear for folks who aren't just dedicated auditory birders. But birding can happen anywhere, anytime, or by ear, and by all levels. So if you like birding, you'll appreciate working your way toward the gear that suits your style of birding, whether it's urban birding or shoreline birding or anything else. And then investment toward that will be well worth it when the time comes. Let your skill lead you to the type of gear that you want. And there's entry-level price points for binoculars and scopes and cameras and all that kind of stuff. But those investments will be worth your while if you're into birding. Just let yourself get there. And to any birders in our audience, I'd like to know, like, what's something you wish you'd known when you started out birding? Drop it in the comments, especially if it's something beginners might not hear anywhere else.
So this week's featured topic is one that we've been meaning to cover for a while, right? Making space for birding in unexpected places. And Dustin, you somehow always manage to find space for birding. I know that as your spouse. I would like to start with an obvious question, though, since you selected this topic for this week. What does making space for birding actually mean to you?
Well, let's be honest. Life doesn't always give you the perfect trail or the perfect free afternoon with a couple of hours to dedicate to something esoteric. So sometimes you're traveling around for completely unrelated reasons, but birds still find a way to show up. And if they show up, I'm going to notice them. So whether we're in a suburban neighborhood or whatever, there will be birds to be found. Suburban, urban, whatever. Birding doesn't require a dedicated schedule. I might just get up and go out at sunrise because no one else is awake and it's a good time to see what's around. Or simply bird from my windows. My binoculars, my bins are coming with me. Next is it's about awareness more than just planning. Planning can be helpful, but you could do no planning and be aware and have just as rewarding an experience. For me, the enjoyment is also in the planning because I'm doing birding from my desk, so to speak, even if I'm not outside. And you can bird in short windows, whether it's 5 minutes here and there outdoors from the car, even making a little game about it with yourself to find like the first bird of your trip when you arrive. I'm going to annoy you and tell you what the first bird is just so that you know I'm doing it. Or keeping like a trip list for the birds that you see during the duration of the trip. And those opportunities come up all over the place if you're tuned in, even if it's a non-birding dedicated trip.
When we are in the middle of other things, how is it that you're actually still managing to notice birds in those moments? And maybe what kind of situations do you like to then take advantage of to squeeze in some extra birding time?
Well, first I like to familiarize myself with the most common birds that I might see at my destination, right? We see house sparrows and mourning doves and stuff like that here all the time. But the common birds like that somewhere else might be lifers, right? So there's always the potential for a new lifer. So I get myself familiar with those. In this case, we're going to Atlanta, and they have, for example, Carolina chickadees. Carolina chickadees look pretty much just like our black-capped chickadees we see outside all the time. And in places where those two distinct species overlap, they're really hard to separate from one another. But down in Atlanta, they only have Carolina chickadees. So what will seem like a common bird to you will be a lifer for me. So being prepared for stuff like that really helps you, notice it in the moment. I'll also be on the lookout for brown-headed nuthatch, which is a bird we don't have here and would be a lifer, and brown thrasher, which is a bird we do have here, but not nearly in the numbers that exist down there. And that's a really good one, like a mockingbird, but tougher and a little bit bigger. They're a cool bird. So partly it's being in tune with what you might see so that when you do see it, it strikes you. But then I'll, use my ears and my eyes to see something flitting around when we're walking from one destination to another, whether it's from a hotel to dinner, from the car to the museum or whatever. Even waiting around in parking lots, because in parking lots and restaurants, gas stations, even grocery stores are notoriously good for like fish crows and other opportunistic birds like gulls. And there's some gulls in Georgia that we don't see as much up here. And then early mornings are great. Oftentimes, if you're an early riser like me, it's an easy way to get out and do some walking when other people, it doesn't impact anybody else's schedule. It just happens that, I'm able to walk in. Frankly, with this sciatica situation I have going, it might do me good to get out and walk for an hour before anyone else even gets up, because maybe I'll get into the good place faster. Looking out the windows, cars, airports are good. Airbnbs, often, they're chosen for Airbnbs because they have good situations. And taking advantage of those situations can help. And then training yourself to just be, always listening and looking. In urban areas like Atlanta, a bird like a common nighthawk could be really good. Common nighthawks are really drawn to all the bugs that are flying over a city or over a ballpark. And they'll be migrating pretty soon as well. So I'll definitely have my eyes on the skies looking for common nighthawks, even though I won't see them here until May.
Okay, so you've mentioned some interesting places specific to Atlanta that you're already thinking out. And I know that you've birded in some interesting places like cemeteries. You mentioned grocery store parking lots. Why do those kinds of spots actually work for birding?
Yeah, different spots work for different reasons. So first, let's think about the urban oases. Oases? I think oases. Urban oases. So some green spaces have simply become programmed into birds' migratory paths, right? An obvious one is like Central Park. Imagine you're a bird migrating up the East Coast and you get to the shit show that is the Northeast with all these tall buildings and bridges and roads and hardly any grassy areas, and then you see Central Park. Man, that is a magnet for birds migrating. So Central Park is sneaky one of the best places to bird on the whole East Coast because it's simply an obvious magnet for migrating birds. So those sorts of urban oases happen on the small scale too. Next is birds that have adapted to human environments. So you have stuff like pigeons and mourning doves and birds like that can be anywhere in suburban environments. The backyard birds or the birds that come to feeders wherever you happen to go, they're not just at feeders, right? They're in the trees, in the parks. And if you take a walk around a suburban neighborhood, you're going to see the stuff like mourning doves or the local version of a mourning dove and the chickadees, even though it's not the same, even though it looks the same, it's not the ones that we've had. So that kind of stuff that we talked about. And then places like cemeteries are sneaky good because first off, they're a green space. They can be that kind of magnet. They often have really nice water features, which birds love. And cemeteries, well, they've usually been there for hundreds of years. So they get programmed into birds' migratory patterns, and they're going to have resident birds like owls and things like that, that like the open space and the natural edge habitat that a cemetery mimics. And over those hundreds of years, they've been intentionally planted with a wide variety of ornamental trees. And in cemeteries, there's a lot of kind of invasive or at least non-native trees that were planted just for their beauty. And that's okay, because if you plant lots and lots of non-native trees, you're going to get lucky and still find some trees that attract the right kind of bugs and birds for those. So cemeteries can be sneaky good for birding for all of those reasons.
Yeah, and one of our favorites around here, right, is Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, which is absolutely exquisite. If you're not local to the area and you're ever traveling through the Boston area, highly recommend checking it out. It's absolutely beautiful to walk around. There's specimen trees. The sculptures for the different grave sites are amazing, and you love to bird there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Sweet Auburn, or nicknamed Sweet Auburn for a reason. It's got all the stuff I mentioned, and it's actually more intentional than most cemeteries for native stuff, but it's got a wide variety of things, numbers of water features. It's even great for seeing foxes and coyotes and things like that because it is really hemmed into Cambridge.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned grocery stores and specifically grocery store parking lots. What's the deal with parking lots? How is that a good place for birding?
Well, parking lots are kind of naturally edge habitats. Even if you don't see trees and shrubs, there's probably some behind the store, that kind of stuff. They have lots of food waste around. There's often dumpsters. Sloppy people spill food, or there might be an overflowing trash can, stuff like that aren't great for people, might not be the right thing, but if you're going to do those things, at least it's contained.
Yeah, now that I think about it, there's more than one parking lot in my life where I've seen a pigeon with a French fry.
Exactly. So there's food waste, and there's excellent high perches on those lampposts too, right? So they can be sneaky good for stuff like fish crows and ravens and gulls, the opportunistic birds. And in places like Alaska, grocery stores attract bald eagles for those reasons.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, bald eagles are like crazy scavengers. We think of them as being fierce. They're not so fierce. They steal from other birds, and they'll eat anything they can find.
Okay. Any really unusual places?
Yeah, I mean, even city drainage areas and like retention ponds and stuff can hold big surprises. Like shorebirds, you could see an egret or, sandpipers or killdeer or things like that. Little blue herons in retention ponds down south. I'll be on the lookout for those wherever we drive this week. So those can be good. Highways also make for really good highway medians, because highways are kind of a migratory landmark. Birds sort of follow I-95 northward, for lack of a better way. So it's not about the beauty of the space. It's about the habitat and the resources that the birds can take advantage of.
Like many of our family trips, this one coming up is not a birding trip. But are you planning to find a couple of moments here and there to try to get out there? And second to that question, I guess my next question would be, like, how do you find the balance? Because you already shook your head. Yes, you intend to find some moments. How do you find the balance between the two women in your life, your daughter and your wife, and all of the things that we are energized to do on trips, and being able to nurture this passion as well?
Yeah, so it's about, not making a big deal about it, not asking anyone to alter their plans and not interrupting the flow of a conversation, like you said, but staying open to the possibility. So let birding fit into the flow of the trip and not to take it over at any point. Don't force anyone else to acknowledge something. And I can slip it in as a joke here and there, like, "Oh, did you see that?" Whatever. In the downtimes, right? Not to distract anyone from the activity of the moment. But knowing just when to enjoy that moment and take note of what I'm seeing. There certainly will be birds that I see and they go off in the mental checklist in my head, and you're not even going to know about it until maybe I'll share that trip list with you, at the end of the trip. And so then, you can build in around what's already happening. So we could be having coffee at an outside cafe. I can be checking out the birds in the trees, across the street or whatever. We could be strolling through a park, enjoying a nice day and get some birding in. And we're going to the Georgia Aquarium. So, like we said before, sometimes there's unexpected places that naturally have good birds overhead. I don't know how the Georgia Aquarium manages their fish waste and other stuff like that, but it might mean that there's a decent natural kind of fauna happening around the Georgia Aquarium. So I'm interested to see about things like that. But on that example, Disney is on that topic. Disney's a really great example of this. We didn't go to Disney birding, but we saw lots of friendly white ibises crawling around Adventureland looking for, chicken tenders and popcorn that might have fallen to the ground. And in the savannas over Animal Kingdom, there's lots of swallowtail kites and really great naturally occurring birds that are benefiting from the environmental diversity that Disney has brought to that area.
All right. So you mentioned it already yourself, that you have this mental list of what you saw on a trip, and just in general, even if it's not a trip, even if we're trying to just get the grocery shopping done. Why do you do that? Like, what's the value of this mental list?
Well, partly I'm doing it all the time, even if I'm at home, but it'll be more memorable to me and help anchor the memory of that trip and that bird, especially if it's something I wouldn't typically see at home. But even seeing familiar birds in a new setting can be meaningful because, birds have regional dialects and they sound a little bit different from here to there. So, for example, song sparrows are a common bird that but they sound regionally very different in different places. So it's interesting to me to hear a bird sound differently than I'm accustomed to, or I'm not the most auditory birder, but I do know when I hear a bird I've not heard before, and that often piques my attention. So it'll pique my attention that way, even if it's a common bird that just sounds uncommon to me.
Okay.
That's one. There also can be different behaviors in different habitats because some birds are not super habitat specific, and they might be that way here, but not quite have such high fidelity to their habitat during migration. And so we're going to be a little ahead of migration by going down to Atlanta. So we'll have that opportunity. And then you just start to associate birds with different places, and different sort of species stick in your memory. The same way you might think of a song and it takes you to a time and a place. I can think of a bird sighting that takes me to a time and a place. I know that the time I saw a northern goshawk on our lake was October 8th of that year.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it just is the way that it works for me. So it gives you a record without the pressure of looking for something. And I'll certainly enter anything notable that I see over our trip into eBird. So it'll create a digital record. And if there's anything, new, I'll have it as a first of year, or both a first of year or a lifer bird.
Okay. So I noticed earlier today, as we're preparing for our trip, at one point, you were checking the bird apps. like you do a lot of the time before we travel, what are you looking for specifically to prepare for our trips?
Yeah, a couple things. I like to get a feel for what's common in the area and getting familiar with the area itself. So the other day I asked you for the address of where we're staying, and I like to zoom into there and see what natural spaces are around, whether it's conservation land, a park, a cemetery, whatever, and have a place where I know I could, whatever, if there's heavy work talk or something happening for you and your friend, maybe I'll bail out and head over to that nearby park or golf course or whatever. So that's helpful just to know the geography. But also I like to look at the hot spots on eBird and take a look at the checklist that other birds have submitted. And I can see in those checklists what's been common, present recently, or present, all the time. And that's how I got to, earlier I mentioned, I'll kind of be on the lookout for Carolina chickadees and brown-headed nuthatches and brown thrashers. Those are good birds I don't see at home very often. So that's a good way to get in tune with that. Sometimes I'll even listen to the calls. So for example, the brown-headed nuthatch is really closely related to the white-breasted nuthatch we have here and the red-breasted nuthatch. And I can discern the white-breasted and the red-breasted because I see them at home, but I don't know what a brown-headed nuthatch sounds like. So I will review the sounds that bird makes so that if I hear it, I can zero in on it and find it. So there's all of that stuff. So I like to focus in on what's likely to hear, not just chasing the rarities. Certainly in a non-birding trip, I'm very unlikely to, come across a rarity, and I won't chase one because that's not the purpose of our trip. But even this kind of casual preparation really helps you notice more what's there and make the most of your time. For example, I was in Shanghai once for work, and I knew I wasn't going to have much opportunity to bird, except for like really early in the morning before I was meeting up with my coworkers to head to the office. So I looked up People's Park in Shanghai and saw that every checklist had light-vented bulbuls, which are common like house sparrows are here. And I went to that park a couple days in the morning looking for white-vented bulbuls, saw them in spades, and the black-crowned night herons, black-crowned night herons were a bonus. But it got me a couple lifers just like that.
Any last tips for our birder friends out here on YouTube when it comes to the adventure of birding in unexpected places?
Just to be open to it at all the time, right? A final reminder, it does not matter if you're in the middle of a national park or standing outside of a grocery store. Ooh, trash dumps and transfer stations are great places for birds too.
Awesome.
Oh, I should have gone. There were some kestrels reported at our local transfer station the other day.
Yeah.
We should have gone there today. Damn it.
We had no time for anything else.
Missed opportunity. But the birds don't wait for those perfect opportunities, and they don't read maps. So if you're paying attention, even just a little, you might be surprised to find amazing birds for your life list in a place that you just didn't expect.
Okay, so that is all for today's episode, folks. Before we head off on our next adventure, this is just a quick reminder that you can find Dustin's wildlife photography and links to all our content channels on our website, hikeandhearth.com.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We love to be part of the YouTube nature lovers community. So keep sharing your comments and your experiences with birding, nature, conservation, and if you're not already subscribed, please be sure to join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are on Substack, check out our newsletter, Hike Hearth Birding. Okay, Dustin, are you ready to send us off for today?
I sure am. Until next time, friends, keep your eyes in the skies and your hearts in the wild.
See you when we're back from our trip, everyone. Bye-bye.